be great. Gonna put us on mute and let our people in. Here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual interactive panel discussion brought to you by the ACHE of Indiana. My name is Tia, and I will be serving as your ACHE technical host for today. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items to help you navigate the program in our virtual environment. First, please note, AI note takers are prohibited to protect the privacy and confidentiality of our instructors and participants, as well as the intellectual property rights of the content presented during the session. For the purposes of noise control, your lines will be muted for the duration of the session. The chat function will be available to you throughout the entire event, and we absolutely encourage you to use it to help keep this session as interactive as possible. Open up that chat box, let us know where you're calling in from, ask questions. We really want to hear from you. This event is being recorded and will be available for viewing in ACHE's Learning Management System in approximately 2 business days. Today's session is worth 1.5 hours of ACHE Virtual Interactive Education credit. To earn this credit, you must be logged in for the entire 90 minutes of this event. All attendees who meet this requirement will have their 1.5 Virtual Interactive Education credit applied within 2 weeks from today's event. We do encourage you to complete the evaluation. I will share the link in the chat box shortly, and then I will reshare it before we close out. Now, to begin, let me turn it over to Corey.
Thank you, Tia. On behalf of ACHE of Indiana, thank you all for being here today. I'd like to begin by extending a warm thank you to our generous 2026 ACHE of Indiana sponsors. We're so grateful for their continued partnership and commitment to professional development and leadership growth in healthcare. Now, I'm happy to hand things over to our ACHE of Indiana board member and today's moderator, Jennifer Hinman.
Hi, good morning. Well, I guess it's still morning. Good morning. I'm Jen Hindman. I am the regional president for the Central Region of Community Health Network and also Communities Hospitals East and North here in Central Indiana. And I am pleased to introduce our panel today. So excited to have these folks with us. So Beth Rashley is here. She is the founder of Rashley Consulting. We also have Matt Browning, who's the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Hancock Health. And then rounding out our panel is Dr. Dan Rusiniak, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Eskenazi Health. And we're going to just get right hopping here and jump right in with topics. We've got some great discussion questions to review today. And then we'll definitely leave some time at the end for you all to ask us some questions. So to Tia's point, feel free to add some questions into the chat and we'll get to those. I know that she and Corey will be watching that for us. So we're going to start right out here today, I think, Matt, with you on this first question. What are the most significant forces driving change in healthcare today? And which do you believe will have the greatest impact on Indiana healthcare organizations over the next few years?
Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. It's great to be a part of this panel and looking forward to the dialogue today. So as I was thinking about this, I think there are high-level macro issues going on, particularly things like the fact that our population not only is getting larger, but are getting sicker in large part. And I think that's really driving us away from a model of episodic care and driving us more to how do we handle chronic disease prevention and how do we handle really trying to candidly prevent people from accessing our services. And then that then has a downstream effect in terms of how do we manage the financial implications of that kind of model as well. Inevitably, you can't think about healthcare right now without also thinking about the impact that technology and AI is having on our organizations. The promise that AI has started with was it was going to fix all of our back office operations. We were, not going to have to use less staff, and we were going to be just much more efficient. And I think those who have been on the leading edge of using AI are definitely seeing benefits, but also are seeing a greater need of human oversight over those functions and how those pieces are working. you can't also not think about other large concentric issues that are going on. We still, 3 to 4 years later, are still emerging from COVID, particularly as it relates to workforce management and dealing with workforce resilience. All of us on this call are trying to hire folks for roles that are those folks have different expectations of what those roles would be like and their level of commitment to those roles, candidly. And so we have to design our HR and our benefit and our other systems to kind of, align to that. But the specific question about Indiana, I think, is unique. I think we're at a very unique point in our state's history where we are looking at a convergence of fiscal policy that's being set by state policymakers right now that is driving a lot of decision making, particularly among systems and among independents and small hospitals right now. Without a doubt, because of the inflation and other type of expense increases that we are seeing, our operating infrastructure is more expensive than it ever has been. And candidly, the only way that you either, sustain yourself in there is either grow or seek scale. And I think you're starting to see a lot of that competitive movement within the state of Indiana right now. So, four basic topics there.
And all definitely very valid. And it might be good too, just to take a minute here and pause and kind of let you share a little bit about your background too, Matt, and just kind of your journey in healthcare, and then
Yeah.
and then our other panelists, and then we can kind of jump in some comments, kind of how you kicked us off, if you don't mind. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you've been and what you've been doing.
Happy to do that. So, so for everybody, so I've been Chief Operating Officer at Hancock Health for about a year now. But prior to that, I spent 7 years at the Indiana Hospital Association, really working within member strategy and solutions. And I worked alongside our advocacy team in trying to really craft and educate lawmakers on what policy decisions and implications may potentially have to the operations of hospitals. Prior to IHA, spent about 15 years at another community hospital here in central Indiana, Hendricks Regional. So have grown up, came through the MHA program here at IU, and just truly blessed to be a part of the central Indiana marketplace.
Thanks so much. I think it's important folks know your background, because you do bring a little bit of a different perspective, having worked for IHA as well. So how about you, Beth? You want to chime in and give us a little bit of your background and your journey in healthcare, and now not, but kind of still is?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Beth. I am the founder of Rashley Consulting, which is a consulting company that works probably 95% within the healthcare space. And that's mostly because that's where I spent my career. So I've spent about 20 years working inside healthcare organizations in the leadership and talent space. So I get the industry, I get the challenges, and I get the privilege of really walking beside a lot of healthcare leaders as you guys are navigating all the things that are happening right now. So happy to be part of the panel and with you all today.
Well, we're glad to have you too. And Dr. Dan, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, and then please feel free to add some additional comments to the first question here, and to Matt's 4 buckets.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be with everyone. Dan Rusiniak, I'm Chief Medical Officer here at Eskenazi. I've been in this role about a year and 4 months or so. Now, prior to that, I spent almost 8 years in state government. I was the Chief Medical Officer and then the Secretary of the Family Social Service Administration, which oversees Indiana Medicaid and a variety of other programs in Indiana. And then prior to that, really academic emergency medicine physician at the IU School of Medicine. I've been a practicing emergency medicine physician here at Eskenazi for about 26 years. Was involved in the poison center operations and a whole, like most ER docs, a little ADHD, a lot of different career things that I've jumped into. I think, to be honest, I think Matt probably nailed it on those 4 buckets. There are changes that are being forced upon us that we are going to have to adapt to. And then with that, there are opportunities for us to change based on how AI and other things are out there. And so it is, at least in my time in healthcare over 30 years, this period of time, I think, feels like the most external change, probably The other time it probably felt this way was when the Affordable Care Act was launched. That was really generally a more favorable change from health systems. Granted, lots of administrative, lots of operational things that had to be put into place. This one, in terms of the changing fiscal environment, I think is one that is rapidly moving. Will get even more rapid starting here in January, potentially in the state. And so, yeah, it's a unique time in healthcare. It's always a unique time in healthcare, but it's really unique right now. So.
Agree. Reflecting upon preparing for this today, I was thinking the exact same thing you just said, Dr. Dan, that, in my healthcare career and journey, we're experiencing more change at such a rapid pace right now. And it's simultaneous change, right? By all of these change forces that are occurring, than we really have ever experienced before. And some of those being obviously internal, but then there are all these external factors that are at play as well. So, all righty. Moving along then, our next question is related to leadership. And so healthcare leaders are facing more priorities now than ever before, as we just mentioned. So how do you determine which changes are truly strategic? And then where do you focus your organizational energy, your leadership energy, and those resources? And I think, Dr. Dan, you were going to kick this one off for us.
Yeah, it's a good question in healthcare. So I'll give a short answer. I'll give a little bit, I think, on the strategy at how you do change that will intersect with the answer. The short answer is the change moving you towards your mission? I mean, that is a really high level. It sounds good. It sounds like something I would, put on a TED Talk. But from a strategic standpoint, that is really what you're talking about when you're talking about strategic change, which is where are we as an organization? What is our mission? And then how do we institute change to help us move towards that mission and that vision? Now, the challenge for organizations within that area is there are far more things, at least within my system and every system I've been in, there are far more things that need change than you have time, resources, and people to change. And so I think in a leadership perspective, and for all those or attending, that is ultimately the job of the executive part of an organization, is to decide what are our priorities, and how you do that really matters, because is that something that is going to be informed by your workforce and by the folks who are delivering the care and what they bring up to you? Is that informed by external environments? Is that informed by if you've got boards and others? And the short answer is good change, strategic change probably has all of those involved. Right. And it really comes down to how do you, if you think about Venn diagrams, how do you find that sweet spot in between like what your providers need, what your patients need, and then what your payers or your board related need. And then within that, how do you get narrow? How do you define that? And then how do you cascade that across your organization? Because the biggest problem that you'll run into is the number of great ideas that are brought in front of you. And so how do you ultimately say, this is the 3 to 4 or 5 things that we're going to focus on this year as an organization, and that's what we're going to do. And if you're good at that, and so I like using objectives and key results, there's lots of different ways to do that. But if you're good at defining the 3 to 4 things that you're going to do and cascading that, that helps all of your employees, your workforce, and everyone else know whether their idea that they want to bring forth aligns with the strategy that you're moving forward. And so, if that's, if your top strategy is fiscal sustainability, then you've got to be really good about sharing that and about sharing the, key results or the key ways that you plan on achieving that, so that others in your organization very quickly can say, you know what, this thing that I'm interested in right now aligns with that very well. So that, I think, is strategic change. There is other changes that are going to occur that you have to be prepared for. And those are changes that you've got to build capacity. And that's the hard part right now as a system to be able to respond to. Those are changes that are brought by others on your organization. And that may be a policy change. It may be a fiscal change. It may be a legislative payment system. It may be an external change. You might have a cyber attack, or you might have an environmental thing. So you also, I think, organizationally, strategically need to build enough capacity that you're narrowed what you're going to work on, and that you've got enough capacity in place so that when those things that you don't know when they're going to come, but you do know they're going to come, you have the ability to respond. So short answer, strategy, get you closer to your mission. But within that, how you do that and how you narrow that and how you cascade that, I think determines whether you're going to be successful.
Other thoughts, Matt or Beth?
I think Dan hit the nail on the head. I mean, in preparation, I thought about answering this question around really kind of grounding in the mission, vision, and values of the organization. But two practical sides to that. Using your mission as your true north also gives you permission to say no. And I think that's a big one that a lot of times we forget, because let's face it, our operational and strategic leaders are really darn good at coming up with reasons why their project, their idea, their initiative, helps us advance the mission. So you have to have some sort of barometer or some sort of rubric by which you kind of evaluate those opportunities. Here at Hancock, we use something called the Pillar Cascade, which allows us to identify with those key strategic priorities within each of our 5 pillars on our strategic plan. And then all of our meetings and all of our, operational reporting and all of our KPIs are kind of, rooted around that. So while the idea may not fit, one initiative may not fit one pillar, we may find a use for it on another side as well.
Yeah, my head went to the exact same place as yours, which is, I think, too often when there's so much happening, we don't think about what comes off the plate in those times. So I liked Dr. Dan's point about, really being strategic about that. But then also, I think giving yourself and your team permission to say, okay, we've got a new landscape in front of us. Here are 4 things we had planned that we're not going to do this year now. And that's hard in a culture. I mean, healthcare is full of helpers. People don't work in healthcare because they want to be rich. They work in healthcare because they want to help. They want to serve patients. They want to take care of people. And so it can be really difficult to set aside those priorities when it could make things better. But that is often the answer. You cannot do it all and do it all well. It's just not possible.
If I could just tack on one other just idea, one other thing that we try to do for those things that we say no to, we always try to say no, but, and so therefore, we always make room for it in our parking lot, if you will. And so what oftentimes happens is, we'll say we'll go put it in the parking lot and we'll revisit it in 4 years or something like that. I think we have to be much more intentional, given the cadence and the pace of the way that our industry is working right now, to go and revisit those things a lot more often. And so just food for thought on that.
Right. Great discussion. So many healthcare organizations must make decisions without having complete information, right? We don't always have the facts at hand. So how do you lead through uncertainty while maintaining trust, engagement of the teams, and the momentum?
I looked at this question and I looked at this question. It's like, gosh, that's a lot of things to do at the same time. What is the actual practical thing that I could pass on? And I came up with this, which is that people can handle uncertainty. What they struggle with is silence. So I think too often what happens is there's a lot of things that are shifting. So new things are coming in, new things are happening. And you as a leader are waiting to have more information to start communicating. And that's a valid response. That's a very human thing to do. And also isn't going to help you in those moments. The faster you can start communicating, even if it's just, I'm not sure exactly what's happening yet, but this is what I know at this moment. And as soon as I have more, I'm going to tell you what that is. I would say get in there faster than you think with information, and maybe faster than what your instinct is. And that also it's okay to say, here's what I know right now, and here's the work that I'm doing to find out more so that I can get you more details. So it's okay to share those things. And communicate even if the answer is, hey, nothing, I don't have more new information, but just know I'm still working on it. right? So the more you can communicate, the earlier you can communicate. I think the more you're able to maintain trust, because people aren't sitting in their at their workstation wondering what's happening, right? They're getting what they can get from you. And I think that's really helpful. The other thing I would just say related to this is to think about things in smaller chunks when it's a big something, right? So if it's, gosh, we're going to roll out this new patient charting system. Gosh, that's a massive overhaul, right? It's just a big, big project. So how can you think about things in as small of a chunk as possible to make sure that you're getting people information again quickly? And I think those are things that help. The other thing I would say is trust is built through consistency. So don't let whatever's happening change who you are as a leader. They need to still expect you to be you and to be as authentic as you can be, even when you're not sure what's going to happen next. So that's my starting point. I'm excited to hear what Matt and Dr. Dan say too.
It's so funny as I'm looking through my notes, Beth. I mean, you hit on like all four of my bullet points with
Oh,
that statement. But I think transparency is the key piece. And I think sometimes we confuse transparency with giving away the farm in terms of information. To Beth's point, saying, I don't know, or I'm not at liberty to share this right now, it authenticates that, hey, I care about your opinion and I care about your thoughts on this process, but just understand there are things that are maybe behind the scenes that I can't share at this point. I think one of the biggest things that probably goes along with any change initiative or any project that's going on right now is that where there is a void of communication, the void is always filled with negativity in stop in no matter what. And so I think to all of us, are probably all type A's and we want to be buttoned up and have the best prepared, information to share to folks. And it feels almost defeatist to say, I don't know at this point, but you actually do better saying when you don't know than saying nothing at all.
Yeah, I contribute as well. I'd say the same. I think people have an amazing BS meter. They absolutely do. They absolutely know when you're not giving them the truth. And don't try to win a moment by trying to give an answer that you think will temporarily satisfy somebody's curiosity. Just be honest, for one. Two is ask them. When there's a lot of uncertainty, people also want to contribute to your knowledge and to the organizational's priority. So when things are changing rapidly, people know they're changing. Ask them, be curious, tell me more about this. How's it affecting you? And then just listen, because you'll get some pretty good ideas usually out of that as well. I also think in times where you're making lots of changes with little information, you need to have the ability to constantly look at your decisions and be ready to potentially change them. And then to this conversation to communicate to the team why you changed them. And, if there's any event that I know you know where I'm going. If there's any event that have taught us collectively in healthcare how and sometimes not how not to do it very well in terms of rapid change and communication, it was COVID. And I think really for most healthcare organizations, I bet those that all of you have been involved with, those beginning parts of the pandemic really brought us as systems together because we were all in it together. We were all experiencing change together. We all had uncertainty together. And I think as much as anything, it caught us prepared for a lot of us. And so we had the ability to grow trust with our teams. And they knew that we were in the same boat and we were just trying to figure it out. They gave us a lot of grace. Like, you're not going to get all these decisions right when you're making them. You're not. And so you've got to have the ability to quickly pivot and then to communicate. We've changed. Here's why we've changed. This is based on this information. We might be wrong. We're going to keep following it. Give us your feedback.
I love it. You all summed up kind of what I had in my mind too, that transparency, the vulnerability, just being genuinely authentic and saying, I don't know, but here's what I do know. And I can promise you that we'll figure it out together. So I love each of the pieces that you brought forward, and it's all great stuff. And at the end of the day, caregivers just want to know that they are heard, right? And to your point, Dr. Dan, they're part of the solution. Like they want to help also and bring forward those ideas that may make meaningful, change or a difference. So, all right. So once direction then has been established, how do you go about gaining buy-in from physicians, nurses, leaders, our frontline caregiver teams? What do you
So I
think,
think
Matt?
yeah, that's softball. Okay, thank you. I think it comes down to kind of this core principle, and I think this is something we all should acknowledge as leaders, is that buy-in it's earned when people feel involved, when people see evidence, and that people feel like you have a respect for the reality that those people are in, that the change is going to affect. And so at the end of the day, involvement is so absolutely critical. I mean, that's the old hammer versus the nail kind of adage. And so hopefully your organizations have solicited feedback about whatever change that we're trying to create that buy-in into, so that folks have that opportunity to participate. But I think the other key point is a lot of times, when we're trying to sell the change to our folks, we will say things like, hey, this is industry standard, or this is, we compare ourselves to other hospitals or compare ourselves to other organizations, and this is how we rank. Make sure to include some internal data about yourself as well in those kind of dialogues. Because a lot of times, that's where people will jump off the ship, right? They'll say, well, that facility you compared us to, that's not us. That's not our culture. That's not our strategy. That's not our piece. So you picked the wrong benchmark. And so sometimes it's just as simple as remembering to keep that kind of included piece to those as well. And then the other part is, I think visibility in the clinicians or the operator's workplace is incredibly critical. So if they come to you and saying, hey, if you make this change, it's going to make it exponentially harder for me to do my job, then show me. I want to see it so that I can truly understand it. So I think, again, core principle, buy-in is earned through involvement, evidence, and respect for their work reality.
Dr. Dan, did you have thoughts? I
Uh,
saw you on mute still.
oh, that's okay. No, physicians are hard. No, I'm joking. We are sometimes. I think the why matters. I think a couple of things we do sometimes with physicians as healthcare leaders is we assume they know more than they know. We assume they care less than they do. And we forget they're scientists and they're curious. And so we really need to get down with key and the key is, I think, also is to get with those key physician leaders, and they may be physicians with titles or they may be physicians with influence. But either way, having them understand the why, the real why, you will often get them both to understand it in a way that perhaps we assumed they did. And I mean, healthcare is crazy complicated, right? Nobody would design a system like this. Nobody. Like, it is way too complicated from payers and from all of that aspect. And so we should not expect people who have a really tremendous skill set and knowledge set within a defined area to also understand all the other aspects of hospital operations. So first and foremost, don't assume that they know things that they don't. Be open, tell them the why. And I think to your point, Matt, don't tell them the reason, right? Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's because we're losing revenue. And if we keep losing revenue, we're going to have to make really difficult decisions on what services we stop providing. And they will get that. And sometimes, not always, sometimes when they have a really understanding of the why, even though they may not love the change, they may then become big proponents with their partners and their peers on being able to share, this is why we're doing it. So I think as an ER physician, we often, we're sometimes the worst, but I love us. But we're often get super frustrated at why do we have to do this SEP1 bundle or pick any quality measure? And you get super scientists who are like, this is stupid. I looked at the literature and all. But when you tell them that, look, this is why we're being graded externally, and this is how that grade for us ties to both our reputation for you as providers, but also ties to contracts and other things that this is how much potential money we lose if we go from a 4-star to a 3-star rating as a system. And at least for us, as a safety net system, we can't be in the business of losing money because we're already starting every year at an operational loss. And so if we do that, then we really start to steer away from our mission. And again, if you get clinicians typically back to the thing that they're there for, which is that our mission is to care for vulnerable population here in Marion County, and these are the things that are going to help us do it either financially or through quality or through operational or through, they will get it. And when you do it well, you will often get them to say, I don't like it, but I understand it. And so I think, again, engage them and engage the key ones. And then, again, you're going to have to go back to them as you make changes along the way.
That's great. Great insight and ideas to encourage that physician engagement, and don't make assumptions. That's what I'm hearing you say. Don't make assumptions, and be sure you share the why, and you'll end up with potentially an advocate and a partner out of it. So, all right. So what role does organizational culture play in successful change? And how do leaders address resistance while supporting an already stretched workforce? Such a difficult balance.
Again, with the softballs here, okay? I mean, what's the old adage that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast? I mean, we've all walked into hospitals or other organizations and felt culture, whether positive or negative. You've walked into facilities where people have greeted you and they seem genuinely happy to be there, and you've walked into others where they that hasn't been the case. And candidly, intentional culture is some of the hardest work I think we will ever do in our careers. You think about there are organizations like Studer or the Disney Institute or the Ritz-Carlton, who all have programs off the shelf that you can go and say, just implement it here, and it'll be successful. At the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the other question that we just talked about, which is, how do we overcome resistance? Is same dialogue that Dan said. I think it's involving them, getting their feedback. Let's lower the BS meter and tell them the why. And again, to that point, they may not like it, but at least they understand it, and which is half the equation in terms of overcoming resistance. I would say there are times that I always like to use the adage that sometimes we're all on the right bus, but maybe in the wrong seat. But there may be times that people are on the wrong bus, and so that's our responsibility to help them find their next mode of transportation. And so those are all parts of managing through that resistance as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in to piggyback off of a couple of things that you said. I completely agree with everything that you just said, and would also add, I think sometimes what gets missed with people who are resisting change is that you're looking at what are they concerned about with the new initiative? And instead, you should look at what are they losing with the new initiative? Because often resistance comes from people trying to protect something that currently exists. So let's pretend it's an organizational restructure, for instance. Maybe my resistance comes from I'm going to have a new boss, or I'm going to have a new team to lead, and I don't know how I feel about that. I really liked my old team. I liked the people that I had before. And so sometimes in order to address the resistance, you have to know, is it coming from that lost side of change? Because often that just gets missed, right? We think it's about what's new, and really it's about the past. It's in the background, not in the future. And the other thing I would say is, Dr. Dan said this earlier, and you guys know this, but I'm just going to say it out loud. The earlier you get people involved, the less resistance you're going to have, because people will be at the table and be able to share their concerns and hopefully get them addressed. So that's just trying to get some resistors off the table before you even start is always a good idea. And then the other thing I would say is look for, and you guys know this about your teams, but look for the people who have the most influence on your team and make sure you get them on board early. Okay. So the squeaky wheels that often are going to struggle, You need to get to them before the big rollout. You guys picking up what I'm putting down? Right? So that will also help you, because if you let the squeaky wheels get out there and get really squeaky, you're going to have a lot of things to try to come back from. So get ahead of that. It'll help you.
Yeah. Or as Matt said earlier, they'll be the negative naysayers.
Yes. Yes.
Because they don't know the why. And
Yeah.
if you bring them in early, then they feel valued and
Yes.
part of the
Yeah.
conversation. They have a seat at the table. So Beth, what leadership behaviors do you think most often accelerate or derail the change initiatives that we're all trying to put into place out there?
It's such a good question, because I think, leadership can be, it's a tricky business I'm in. You guys are all in, right? It's not, I wish I could give you an exact recipe for do these 4 things and everything's going to always work out fine. And unfortunately, because you're in a people business, that's just not really how it works. You have to know who your people are. You have to know what makes them tick. And the more trust you already have built up when these such situations come up, the better off if you're going to be. So I would say, like, big picture, do the basics now ahead of change, right? Before something big comes in, make sure you've got strong relationships with your teams. Make sure you're leading with empathy. You've got high trust relationships. Those things are going to help you. And that's always going to, folks who have that already built up or just automatically going to be more successful during change initiatives. That's just gonna make it a lot easier. Some things that I see really you know, detract from that, I would say some of these, again, you guys know, under communicating is going to get you every time. Making assumptions about what people know and what they understand, that's going to get you every time. That's never once going to work out. So really focusing on over communicating versus under. And then the other thing I would add, and to Matt's point, if you've got really strong change resistors and you're allowing that, that is also going to derail your change. So, and what I mean by that, it doesn't necessarily mean everybody needs to leave your organization, right? We're not necessarily kicking people off the bus, but are you having conversations with those resistors? Are we talking about what appropriate resistance looks like versus derailing resistance? Are you just letting that run amok? That's also something that I see often derail things.
I'd add one thing if I can.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
another
jump
thing
in.
that people challenge that you can is micromanaging the change.
Mm.
So really for organizations, what you're trying to give people an idea is where you're going. And you may have some key things that you're putting in place to get there. But when you micromanage, or if you have managers who micromanage how that change is occurring within individual units, people lose agency, they feel like they lose autonomy. And what you end up getting is people who change their behavior by doing exactly what they have been told to do and nothing else. And so it's a challenge sometimes in an organization, but you want to give people the ability to help you achieve that outcome that you're trying to achieve by giving them some autonomy on how that is delivered and how that's done within their individual unit or area.
I love that. It's like giving them the opportunity to rise to the challenge. And I think that's hard sometimes for us because we do have a desired outcome. We wouldn't be doing the change if we weren't trying to affect something. But in some degree, you have to put it out into the universe and hope that people see it and rise.
And when you think about it, as we've been talking this morning, we're talking about multiple layers of change that are happening by multiple forces. And as I was just listening to the three of you talk, I was just thinking our teams aren't experiencing change one initiative at a time, and we're stopping that one initiative. It's an accumulation of change. It's cumulative. And so they're experiencing that in that manner. And so it just feels like to them wave after wave after wave of change. So at the core of what I feel like I'm hearing each of you say is it's about culture, right? The culture, the trust in the relationships, the clarity, the pausing to listen, the involving the team members. is all about the culture that's been built. And that's what's actually necessary to successfully have the capacity to drive and navigate through the change versus, sitting out there and like, oh, they're just doing one more thing to me. This is one more thing you're forcing me to do. So it just, I picked up on that just as a kind of a common thread from little nuggets that each of you have shared. So anything else anyone wants to share about leadership, behaviors or derailers before we move on? All right. Well, along with this and kind of segueing into this kind of wave after wave of change, during times of significant change, how do we ensure that decisions remain centered on patients, families, and the communities we serve? And if you all don't mind, I'd love to jump on this one and then have you chime in with me. But I think one of the greatest risks that we have as leaders during these periods of change is that we often can become so laser focused on driving the change and accomplishing what we're being asked to do that we sometimes can lose sight of what the intended benefit is of the change and who it's impacting. Like, what are we losing, or who's at the root of what we're supposed to be doing here? And as Beth mentioned, we're all helpers in healthcare. And so at the end of the day, we're all here because we want to take great care of patients and their families and the communities we serve. And so I often try to really stay centered on those core pieces of what is at the root of what we do and why we do it. And I often, in my own mind, maybe not always verbally, although I have done it, and I'll share a little story about that, but I think about when I'm faced with a decision or we're faced with a decision as a team, like, how will this improve something? Either it's the experience, the outcome for the quality outcomes for the patient, access for the patient, or well-being of the people that we serve as healthcare organizations. And try to think through that in my mind when I'm being asked to do these things so that I can then articulate that why. As I think we mentioned earlier, when you're cascading information, you're all working towards the same thing. I worked for a leader for about 5 years, and he came to us from Ohio Health, and he brought Wilson the volleyball with him. And Wilson the volleyball now is up above me on my shelf because when he retired, he passed him to me. And I remember the very first capital discussion we had with this leader, his name was Joe Hooper. He brought the volleyball down to the boardroom with him and sat him in the middle of the room and said, Wilson is the patient. And he had used Wilson, it had been given to him as a reminder during a huge master facility plan and capital expansion project that every decision that team was making was rooted in Wilson is the patient and what would the patient want? Are we making the right decision? And that just kind of stuck with me. And he's just a little visual. So sometimes folks that don't know the story, they'll come into my office and they'll see him and they'll be like, oh, you have Wilson. And I'll be like, yeah, well, Wilson's the patient. So sometimes I will think about that in the back of my mind too. And I don't know about any of you, but if you have some great tidbit like that just how do you keep the patients at the center of the decisions that you make every day, especially when it comes to making change in this rapid environment?
So when people come into your office, do they just maybe assume you're a huge fan of Castaway?
I think so sometimes.
Know what it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think I love that. And it was going to kind of a corollary to what I think, which is kind of symbolism and intentional reminders of why we're doing what we do. My story is similar, but for a negative way, actually. And so for an organization I worked with, unfortunately, we experienced a foreign retained object in one of our patients during surgery. And that was a traumatic thing clearly for the patient, but it was also a traumatic thing for our organization. But we decided to use that as a true north. And so we actually, this may sound a little, I guess, dark. I don't know if it would, but we actually framed the picture of the X-ray where we discovered it, that we had left a surgical retractor in patient's abdomen. And anytime we were in a quality committee or a patient safety committee talking about things where we were candidly saying, well, it's going to be harder for us to do our job if we implement X, we'd put that image up. And do you remember why we're doing this? And so I think it's important as leaders for you. It doesn't have to be quite that dramatic, but I think it's important for you to find symbols or things that are almost tie breakers when the dialogue is going in circles to bring everybody back and say, do we remember why we're doing it? This it's Wilson, or it's this picture of this patient. Ironically, we also went on a journey then to become a patient-centered organization. He actually joined our patient safety committee and attended every meeting and was an amazing advocate for our organization as well as patients moving forward. So I think the other part of this thing is inviting the voices of those that you're serving to the table and making use of PFACs and other entities like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the patient family advisory councils. They're
Mhm.
they're so important to making sure that the changes that we are making actually hit the mark, right? I
Mhm.
mean, they're the ones that are experiencing it. So, Dr. Dan or Beth, any thoughts?
Yeah, I love the symbolism on both those. I also think keep close contact with your frontline patient-facing staff and ask them. They will bring up all, because we tend to hear about the bad side, but they'll also bring up success stories if you ask them, and let them also bring to you how this is impacting patients. And then as a leader, when you hear it, be responsive and do, if there's opportunities to change what you're doing in a way that is very specific to that example that was brought forth, do so. If you can't, then also thank them and tell them why that you can't do it, but these are the things that you want to do to continue to serve the patient. So again, I think having that frontline patient facing staff, not in leadership roles, but the ones who are doing the actual work day to day, have a voice in this also is a great way to escalate and elevate the patient into the discussion.
Well, before we jump off of this topic, we actually have a question in the chat related to this. Larry asks, when attempting to keep the patient at the center of decisions or change, I often face many team members who believe that they know what patients need or want. How do you systemically bring voice of the customer into the process? Or systematically bring the voice of the customer into the process?
I'm off mute, but I'm the least qualified person to answer this, so I will put myself back on mute.
I think Dan and I were both like, "Oh, go, Beth. There you go."
Yeah, I was like, that's gonna take it.
But I love this question because you're right. It's the intentionality of making sure that we're just not rushing ahead to program and do something, that we're actually intentionally pausing and saying, well, how will patients actually mean this? I think PFACs were something that when they were originally stood up, I think they were kind of soft, candidly. They were just, a little bit of symbolic. You kind of checked a box on an accreditation that, yes, we listen to our customers. I think really turbocharging the role that PFAC plays is critical. From everything from project and facility design to, sharing good and bad patient satisfaction data with and get, perspective that way. I think those are all, I think, so kind of landing the plane here. I think taking the PFAC and truly using it as an advisory group is a good way to make sure that you're constantly listening to the customer. And I would say on that PFAC, making sure that you are turning over the folks who are participating in that so that you always have fresh feedback.
Yeah, I'd add also to the question on the providers often feel like they are advocating for the patient's position. Many organizations also have an office of patient experience who reaches out to those patients and talks to those patients when those things come up. So utilize those as well. They're not physicians, they're not providers, and that helps in that communication because they're not using medical terms and jargon. They're able to much better listen to what the patient's experience was and then bring that back to you. So we utilize our office of patient experience quite a bit, not just I think for complaints, but if you're really trying to get outreach about what somebody wants or somebody needs, that is a potential avenue and venue to get real world feedback.
Yeah, I think that's smart. The one thing I would add, I'm just thinking about this, and I don't know that I have a magic way to make this happen. But I do think the more and more when you are working to solve patient problems, you can have people in the room who are able to take off their clinician hat and really think about things from the patient perspective, you're going to get better outcomes. So just as a small story, I'm going through occupational therapy right now. I just started it on Friday. So I'm a new patient. I've never done anything like that before. I'm at a system I'm not usually at. I'm usually at Gen System, but it was anyway, series of events. I'm not at Gen System. And it has been a terrible experience. Everything about it has been terrible. I've been thinking about, okay, what do I do about it? And how do I try to solve this as a patient? But there are so many opportunities for it to be better. And I think the people inside that are too close, right? They're not thinking about, okay, what does it feel like to walk in as a new patient here? So, how do you get that voice in the room just as often as possible?
Yeah, and some organizations do use the kind of secret shoppers, which is a really
Yeah.
helpful thing where you're sending in folks who are really just there to experience it as an independent third party. And so I think those can serve as useful ways of getting real feedback.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you brought up also, Beth, we're often not only deliverers of healthcare, but consumers, and our family members and our friends. And I don't think there's anyone in healthcare who hasn't had a neighbor who has been more than happy to tell you about the experience they had at your system in a negative way. That's valuable. And so I think also, being responsive and open to that, at least in my world, I've had plenty of people willing to share their experience. So.
Yes. As painful as it is sometimes, it's critical information that we need to know so that we can be better. And we can't fix what we don't know. So for sure.
That or with that, we're billing experts as well. So there you go.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right. Well, Matt, you brought up AI early on. So from AI to digital transformation to the new care delivery models, organizations, we're all, representing different organizations today, but we're all facing pressure to be innovative. So as a leader, how do you decide which innovations are worth pursuing? And then how do you implement them successfully?
So I love this question because wrapped up in it is like all the excitement around what AI can do, and then just, all of the various care models that CMS puts out or talks about and whatnot. I will tell you, innovation sometimes I think struggles with one constant problem is that sometimes it's a solution looking for a problem. And I think this number one step with any innovation is it's the problem statement. What in the world are we trying to fix with this? And what are we trying to impact or improve? Um, you know, we can get excited about CAMI or another type of care model that comes up, but what if you're not a large oncology provider or you're not an large orthopedic provider? Why are we looking at that? So number one, I think is just clearly defining what problem, what are we trying to affect? There is no shortage of software vendors or other, consultants out there who want to come in and tell you how to fix your problem. But without knowing what that problem is identified first, that's the number one piece. I think AI is really interesting because, the promise of AI is what everybody's getting excited about, right? It's this, hey, it can take over all of the mundane tasks. It can take over a lot of the back and forth that we have to do with payers, all these other kinds of items as well. What I think sometimes we lose sight of is how do you truly govern AI in a protected way? And this is something we're doing a lot of work at Hancock here around actually kind of building a protected AI box around certain uses, if you will. So I guess, how do you decide which innovations are worth pursuing? Number one, are they actually fixing a problem you have? Okay. And then number two, it's the same formula I think we've been talking about on this call is how do you implement them? Again, the right people in the right room at an early time, providing feedback and agreement that the problem is the problem and that they become, champions for the project, kind of moving forward.
That's great.
Yeah, I love it. I'd love to jump in with just a couple of thoughts around I know and coach a lot of leaders who are trying to figure out how do they leverage AI to try to save themselves some time. I don't know anybody working in this space as a leader who's like, you know what, I have like tons of free time and I just everybody's working really hard, right? So how do we start to leverage some of these tools to lighten the load? And it can be tricky for you guys because you can't just, there are ways to connect AI to your inbox to start drafts of emails and things like that. You guys can't do that yet because there's potentially patient information in there. So you have to get a little bit, I think, creative with using AI. But some of the use cases that I've seen be incredibly helpful. One is policy writing. At least first drafts of policy writing. If you're not leveraging AI for that, you're missing a huge opportunity to get a really solid first draft that you can then just tweak to match what your organization is doing. So any space like that, brainstorming, policy writing, first drafts, project plan first drafts, just having not a blank screen in front of you when you're starting out on things like that ends up saving you a ton of time down the road. So if you haven't been playing with it for those types of uses, that's something I would really recommend. The other thing I would encourage you to think about, especially just as you think about your day as a leader, is if you can identify some of your pain points. So where are the spots that you really struggle? Is it calendaring? Is it email management? Is it having enough time to meet with your people? What is that pain point? Get that identified and then ask AI to help you try to solve it. And it actually comes up with some really great ideas. So just starting to experiment and play with it if you're not, for how do you get a little bit more space in your day. It's something I'm just also as a leader playing a lot with myself. Like, how do I give myself a little bit more space with some of these tools? And it's baby steps right now, but it's helping, and every little bit helps at the end of the day.
I'm glad you brought up about the space in the day, because where I find the value is like, not can AI help me do more stuff? It's how can AI free up time, whether it's an hour here or 30 minutes there, whatever that time is. And then how can that, so for example, if nurses at the bedside use AI, as part of documentation for their notes, if that frees them up for 30 minutes, what can they do that's powerful with that 30 minutes? That's high value work. It's improving the experience or the quality outcomes. And it's the same thing with leadership. If AI note taking frees you up for an hour or 2 hours a week, what can you do with that? Can you connect with your teams in a more meaningful manner than being bogged down typing up notes or writing a policy or, doing meeting prep or things like that maybe is low hanging fruit. So that's kind of where I find the value in the utilization. So just a thought, but.
Yeah, I completely agree. And everything, personally, how I try to use it is, what can it take off my plate that, number one, I'm bad at, and number two, like that is really giving me more time to be with clients and more time to serve others. That's what I want. I don't want it making more work for me, to your point. And I would love if you guys have tips or tricks. I know you guys are out there playing with it too. So if there's something that you find that is really working for you, throw it in chat and share it with the rest of the group, because I'm sure everybody is playing with all the technology right now.
The vacation planning, the
Yes.
recipes, the plan the meals for the week kind of stuff, the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Dr. Dan, I thought I saw you were going to chime in too.
All I was going to do is to sort of connect those two. I think Matt's right that you first have to have a problem you're solving. But as part of that, and get back to the strategy, one, make sure that problem is tied to your mission and that it's one of your priorities. Number two, then make sure you measure the impact. And as part of that measure, what you're going to do with the impact. So I think the best point, because we're using Ambient like lots of other folks, we're using it specifically because of feedback we've received from providers about how little time they have in their workday to spend with patients and how much time they have to spend outside of work catching up with documentation requirements. And so that is a common complaint across the systems. And so for us, using Ambient and piloting, number one is we're measuring then how much less time are people charting after hours. And the reason I think that's helpful is if you make an improvement, and a lot of times you're gonna, what you don't want to do then is to turn that improvement into another problem, right? Where you say, okay, you've now got more time in the day, so we're going to increase your panels. When really they started off with too much work to fit into a workday, we free up some time, and instead of going back to the baseline of like, that is now what a normal day should look like, we have to be careful strategically that we start off with what we're really trying to accomplish, that we don't take a solution and create another problem by saying, oh, now look, you've got more time to see more patients. And so I think that gets to the prioritization. What's the problem you're going to solve, and strategically making sure that you know what you're measuring along the way and that you're checking in on.
Yeah. Maybe that 30 minutes is to breathe, like breathe and refocus and reset yourself too, so.
And occasionally to, again, give people freedom in that time. What we have seen, again, we're fairly small in this pilot, is that some providers on their own are like, I can see more patients. Because that is, after all, why many of them are there, is to see more patients. So also giving them the flexibility to use some of that success. I do think it is a challenge, and I don't have an answer. The number of things thrown at everyone, I'm going to guess, Matt, you and I and others on here get 15 emails a week, and often texts and calls about some new, like the information overload. I also would just ask people to consider the source. So if somebody's cold calling you or reaching out to you or buying you dinner to talk about it, that automatically puts it farther down on my list. When you have a problem and then you start searching out solutions, and then you identify somebody, I think it tends to work a little better. But man, the information overload in AI is insane right now.
I think you hit something that's really important that I think, candidly, as an industry, we struggle with, which is the use of pilots. There are a lot of times we get super excited about the solution. We did it right. Okay, we sat down, we said, here's the problem we're trying to solve. We went out and did a bunch of research and said, oh, here's the right solution. And we're just going to implement and go. And we sometimes miss that interim step, which is, why don't we, do this in a constrained or a smaller way to make sure that, number one, we have full organizational buy-in. Number two, learn what's unique about this solution in our culture. And three, get feedback from end users, because, when we decide to deploy it house-wide, we also are able to check the box and say, yeah, we got feedback through this process as well. It takes longer, and I think that's why sometimes that step gets sacrificed, but I think it's all critical to successful implementations every time.
That's great. Matt, can you maybe share with us about a change initiative that didn't go well or didn't go as planned, and maybe kind of what you learned from that and how it's influenced you?
This is the question. This is the question everybody loves, right? They're like, okay, what did Matt screw up? And love to hear from all of those. So yeah, in thinking about this, there are definitely some practical things that I've tried to implement or do or run projects over my career that failed for kind of some common problems. And so I'll be very transparent with you. I was part of implementing a voice over IP system to replace a legacy telephony system at a hospital many moons ago, and had brought in outside consultants, made a great selection on a vendor, had brought in additional consultants to help on the implementation. And candidly, in administration, probably we took our eye off the ball a little bit as to assuming that the project was working, that we were getting the necessary information to be successful in the go live. And so come to that, that fun night where we all are on call at night. We're in the hospital at midnight. We're going to switch over to the new system. And about 3 hours in, when we realized the entire hospital was being ran off my cell phone in terms of the main line, we realized we had a significant problem. And the root cause of that at the end of the day came is we just did not have enough executive leadership visibility into the project. And we had unfettered trust in our consultants that we were much further prepared than we were. Luckily, in that situation, we were able to back out and restart, led with some significant change. We had some internal champions step up to the table who became our IT leadership at that time. But again, I think one of those opportunities as a leader to, I always go with the adage of trust but verify. That you're not you have a team for a reason, but asking them the questions over and over again to make sure we're getting consistent answers is a good point, especially as something as operationally disruptive as changing an entire telephone system at that time. So making sure that you have visibility all the way through the project was the lesson that I learned there. I have a lot more, but I'm going to stop.
Yeah, I will add one thing, Matt. When you're hiring people, you should always ask something they failed, and if they say nothing, don't hire them because they're due. So the only thing I would add on that in terms of being part of many failures, as everyone in these positions have been part of many failures. And to be honest, your last failure was your last failure. It often helps decrease the number of failures you're going to have, but you're still going to have them because there's so many things that are unknown. And to get at, if you can, when you're launching any change, particularly if it's something that affects operations or provider payments or something, if you can run two things simultaneously for a year or for a period of time where you're running the old thing and the new thing. So say, for instance, say you were changing how you were going to reimburse one of your provider groups, and it makes total sense. And you're like, this makes sense. We should absolutely move to this reimbursement and this incentive or this productivity. And that makes sense. And you've even talked to them and it makes sense. The one thing that will inevitably happen is you don't have all of the information, and you will never have all the information at the launch of one of these things on all the different ways that it could potentially go wrong. And so that's why if you do have an opportunity to launch it where you're going to say, like, we're going to keep the old payment system for the next 6 months, but every one of you is going to get an email around how the new payment system would have changed, your reimbursement or anything like that. Or if it's a hard and a telephony system, but anything like that where you can run things for a period of time simultaneously, you will get real world information on ways that this is going to potentially go off, and they will always go off the rails a little bit much, much earlier and reduce your launch kind of failure quite a bit. That said, sometimes you just got to launch and you're going to have some failures. And to Matt's point, make sure you get a lot of input and a lot of feedback with your leadership along the way.
And be upfront that you're going to have to pivot, right? When things don't go well, we're going to pivot and communicate that early on. I think Beth has mentioned the over communication too. So
yeah. I would say I was thinking about this question, and like everybody else, I have a bajillion that I've done wrong, right? I think we all do. The common thread for me when it's gone sideways is almost always that I was not fully invested in the change. And that's something I think to be really conscious of as a leader. Sometimes you're in a position where you're implementing something that you wish you didn't have to implement, right? Like it wasn't your idea to have to cut staff or right? It wasn't part of your game plan. And to really try to get through that grief process and that processing ahead of your team, that's going to help you. And that's something that I've really worked on as a leader, because I know if I'm struggling, they're going to struggle so much harder.
that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
What are kind of doing some self-reflection on where you stand with the change? What is your intention? Are you unintentionally not, managing the change up or communicating the why or those types of things? That's really good from a leadership perspective to have that self-reflection.
Yeah. And even just thinking through like, okay, I might not love this, but what is this getting? Or, what is the potential? And can you lean into what could be possible from it and do that work on your own before you're in front of your team about it?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Dan, I'm going to pivot to you on this one. So what separates organizations that successfully sustain change from those that see the initiatives that they've tried to put into place, fade away after that initial launch?
Yeah, I don't have a perfect answer. I think one is, why did you do the change in the first place? And I think to Beth's point, is it strategic? So is this something that somebody put in place? It sounded like a great idea, but it really wasn't part of your strategy. It wasn't part of your mission. Your teams weren't fully invested and they weren't part of it. And as such, the moment somebody stopped paying attention to it is the moment it died on the vine and sort of dwindled. So one is things die that are not good change. Two is, how are you monitoring the outcomes of your change? And so with anything, you really should. I like to think of change as starting with the outcome that you want to accomplish. Like, why do we do this? And, a year or 2 years down the road, how is this thing going to be better? Then you figure out the steps needed to that change. And then you figure out the measurements along the way that you would track to suggest that you're moving towards that outcome. And you communicate that, whether that's in person with your teams, it's whether with your dashboards. I'm not a huge KPI guy, I get it, but you've got to have like regular feedback to those who have had to institute this change to say, this is the progress that we have made along the way. And it gets to the fact that you can't have a million things changing. And it goes back to the very first conversation. What are your priorities? What are the things you're going to change? The last thing is you've got to have champions that in their particular areas are going to be the folks that help institute it and help it be successful. And then you need those champions to periodically give you feedback about how it's going. I don't think I have a perfect answer, but I think how you design your change, I think making sure it's part of your strategy, it's part of your priority, that you've got key people involved and that you're measuring its success along the way and sharing those measurements with the team, at least ensures that its momentum continues.
Yeah, I think that point is spot on. I think too oftentimes we do kind of get wrapped up in the KPI, and we will continue to track it and track it and track it. And let's say you've achieved your outcome. I walked into change initiatives that were tracking the same KPI 7 years later, and I'm like, well, by continuing to focus on this, clearly we have landed this process. Let's put this in a parking lot. Let's afford more opportunity for other items to be reflected upon. I think the other big thing is being, flexible and willing to adjust. You may go through it again. You may have intended one outcome, but given organizational or socioeconomic or policy or all these concentric waves that we're dealing with, the intended, change in the beginning doesn't make sense anymore. Let's not die on that hill. Let's adjust and say, okay, this is no longer feasible for us. I think that's probably the last point, which is be willing to say, all right, this change doesn't work anymore. Stop, move on.
Yeah, early on, we talked about the plates already being overfull and everything can't be a priority. So at the point it no longer serves whatever it was intended to serve or serving, patients, taking that step back and saying, this is no longer valid, and being willing to admit that, like, it served its purpose and now we're done with it. Let's put it to bed, take it off the plate. I think we probably all agree. It's not about the quality of the change initiative. A lot of times it's because you can run a change initiative plan and stand that up. It's about what you do with it afterwards. And I think keeping it at the center, if it's important, then it's at the center of the conversations at the meetings, in your roundings. I think about the leadership operating system we put into place at Community North. It's a work in progress. It was a change initiative so that we were all focused on not only North's goals, but Community Health Network's goals and ensuring our leaders were aligned. And the work that they do every day has purpose and value, and they're not spending their time, working on things that maybe they don't need to be. But we've spent 3 years continuing to tweak it and evolve it and, implement a visual management tool and so on. But it's important enough to us that it is part of what we do every single day. And it's what drives the results. And so we say we'll pivot on it if we need to, but we bring it up in every rounding, and it's just kind of hardwired and part of the fabric of what we do. So I think when it doesn't become that anymore, that's when you have to say, hey, this doesn't make sense any longer. So Beth, any thoughts before we pivot to the last question?
I think you guys crushed that. I have no notes.
All right, no notes. So as we kind of wrap up before we head into open forum for question and answers from those that are listening in, as you all look ahead to the next 5 years, what leadership capability will be the most important for successfully leading change in healthcare?
Who's got their crystal ball?
Authenticity.
Building on that, I wrote down relationship building. spending time, investing time, and cultivating relationships with people.
Yeah. And my head went to, I think it's going to continue to be, I think it already is, but I think this is going to get even more ramped up. It's going to be leaders who can balance empathy and accountability.
I had
you-
adaptability.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of yes, kind of a some.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say, Beth? Why?
No, I think that balance, I think there are lots and lots of leaders who do one or the other well, but the really exceptional leaders are the ones who can do both. So can I care about you and also get results?
Home
That's where
run,
all the magic is.
Yeah.
home run answer there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at actually about 15 minutes for questions and answers. So we will, Corey and Tia, I don't know if you want folks to just put them in the chat or come off mute or how we would like to do that, but we're open to answering any questions that you all might have for us.
We do invite everyone to drop your questions in the chat. There is one question, Jennifer, from Larry.
Oh, we answered that one earlier.
Oh, you did that one? Oh,
Yeah, we
awesome.
did that one when we were on that topic because it was just timely when he popped it in there. So
Great. We do invite any other questions. You can come off mute and ask those questions as well.
Like,
Hey. Oh, hi. My name is Melissa Watkins, and I'm joining you from rural Western North Carolina. And I am part of Advocate Health, the behemoth of Advocate Health, specifically Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist at Wilkes Regional Medical Center. And I feel that with such a large organization, as a manager myself, that more needs to be invested in frontline leadership training because it's often clinicians with tenure that get promoted up, and there can be a disconnect. I tell my team to trust that the initiatives are based on best practice. But when initiatives roll down from the top, and as was mentioned before, frontline leaders don't necessarily know the why or how it's tied to strategy and improvement in the patient experience, then that can feed into the culture and the resistance when you're at a more remote location, that it just feels like the change is just rolling downstream one after another. So does anyone have any thoughts on what can be done to strengthen those frontline supervisors and managers?
I got a lot of thoughts. It's like one of the things near and dear to my heart is leadership development, but I'm going to let Beth kick us off because this is kind of what she does, in her career, and then we'll hear from Matt and Dan. Dr.
yeah, I just want to start by giving you an amen, Melissa, because you get to the point that is part of why I do what I do, which is healthcare historically has underdeveloped leaders, I think always. And that is doing healthcare as a system a disservice. It's also doing the leaders themselves a huge disservice. To just expect people to step into that role and know exactly what to do and exactly what's going to work and what's not is unrealistic, right? What makes you a great nurse doesn't make you a great nurse manager, right? And vice versa. So I'm struggling a little bit with how to answer your question in the gap of leadership development. So if your system isn't doing a lot of leadership development, there's a lot you can do for yourself to self-develop. And I would encourage you to do that. If you're a reader, there's lots of great books out there. I would be happy to email you a list of some like starting suggestions, and I wrote your name down, so I'll get you at least a starting point with a book list. Developing strong mentor relationships is another like low cost, easy way to just start building into yourself as a leader. And the other thing I would start with is some sort of self-reflection habit. So that might look like answering a couple questions at the end of each day. That could sound like, what's something today that went really, really well that I'm proud of as a leader? What's something that was a disaster that I want to take note of today, right? And you'll notice as you start to do any sort of reflective habit like that, you'll notice some patterns in your behavior. And you'll find some ways to kind of fine tune that based on what you're noticing about yourself. But it can be difficult to stop and do that pause of, gosh, what did I do well? Where might I have a little bit of growth room? So that might be some places to start. But again, I echo what you're saying, and I think it's, definitely more investment needs to be made there.
I think one of the hardest things about this is that unfortunately, as margins become more compressed,
Yeah.
these are often the areas that tend to end up on a spreadsheet, and so I'm not sure if part of your question, Melissa, is also rated at what can you do in your role for your own people that you're trying to, teach and cultivate. There's some really kind of interesting practical things that you can do. I mean, you have some leadership responsibilities around things like budgets and maintaining operational, monthly variance reporting and productivity and kind of just the bread and butter stuff. I remember when was in those roles as well, I would show my people what this is and what it takes to do that work. And so that, almost by halo, they get a little bit of an experience as to what it means to sit in the leadership seat. So for lack of being having a real formal program, there are informal ways that you can bring them to the table as well.
Yeah, all I would have added is the informal part. I think peers, I think one of the challenges sometimes people have is they try to formalize leadership, and it's helpful. We spend a lot of time in organizations typically on new folks, and then folks at the later points, and it's the middle where all the work's done that we tend to ignore leadership development. That said, I think a lot of times that leadership development can occur organically within those groups. And while budgets are tight, a lot of organizations, if you build a small group of team and you're going to use each other, like nobody has to be the expert. That's the beautiful thing. If you're going to use each other to help sort of solve real world problems, you're going to build trust amongst one another. You're going to get to know how each other works, and you're going to solve some real world problems. And then you can use that a little bit, I think, to go to your organization and say, hey, we'd like to either formalize this program. We have one within our nursing program that they all have to have a project, they have to develop it has to be approved, and then they get a certificate at the end of it. And we have got lots of people who want to be part of that program every year. It doesn't cost a ton of money as an organization. It costs a little bit of a celebration at the end of the year. It costs people time. And to be honest, the one thing people probably don't have is time. But if you do this well, you actually end up decreasing the number of problems that you deal with, which ends up freeing up your time. So it's one of those things. But I think lean on your peers, develop local peer leadership groups. Don't expect anyone to have to be an expert. I don't love external consultants coming in and doing leadership development. Sorry, Beth, I'm sure you're phenomenal. But you can use them to help you develop a group that you run within your teams, because you know your situations, your people, and your challenges far better than anyone else.
I actually agree with you. As a consultant, I also agree with you. So.
All right. It looks like we have about 7 minutes, and we have another question in the chat. Thoughts on how the rapid pace of healthcare change is making access to care a bigger challenge and preparing our teams accordingly.
Yeah, I'd be happy to step in, and then others can challenge. You as a leader or somebody on your team has got to be informed, and you've got to have an understanding of it. You can't find out about this in the news. So, for instance, Marion County has seen a 28% decrease in the number of people on Medicaid in the last 18 months. I would venture to say every conversation I have with folks in my organization, I share that piece of information. And then I can tell them a little bit of why. So you'll have folks in your organization that track these things. First and foremost, you have got to acknowledge the change that's occurring, even if you can't control it with your teams. Acknowledge that you know about it, and that will also help you, I think, to determine like what are we going to do as an organization. As we Medicaid wise, is if we lose 28% now and then we launch work requirements in January, and now we're talking about what, 30-40% of people are going to come off Medicaid. What are we as an organization going to do? One is we've acknowledged the problem. Two is then we can start saying, well, we are doubling down on our financial access counselors. We're doubling down on our social workers. We're going to do what we can. What we can control is when we have patients, we're going to see if we can help them get back on Medicaid and check their eligibility and the work requirements, et cetera. So first and foremost, again, preparing your teams is by engaging them in the change that's occurring and making sure they're aware of it. Even when you don't always have control or the answers to it, at least letting them know you're part of it. It's the same way we did with COVID. This is what we know. This is the information we have. This is what we're going to do right now with it. Probably change tomorrow, and we'll keep you updated.
I think building on that, I agree, spot on, is just acknowledging what and understanding what is the true impact of your organization going to be. I think the other part is doubling down on an inventory of other community resources that can step in and help. So CAMSCs, other for not-for-profits in the area that can be of assistance for these. Without a doubt, we're going to see more ER volume. We're going to see a lot more self-pay. We're going to see a lot more uncompensated care because of some of these changes. At the end of the day, you've heard it throughout this entire conversation. This is all about patient care. So you may see some very interesting strategies come together to maybe reroute people to better places of care.
Are there any other questions for us? If not, we will pivot back to Tia to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. On behalf of ACHE, I want to thank our chapter leaders that planned today's session, our moderator, our panelists, and of course, all of you, our attendees. Please complete the evaluation, which is open for 1 week. The direct link is in the chat box. You can also access the evaluation by visiting your My ACHE page and selecting My Online Learning from the helpful links section on the right side of the screen. From there, click on the Access My Courses link, and you will be directed to our learning management system where you can complete the evaluation. In the same location, you will be able to access the recording of this session within approximately 2 business days. Everyone who attended today's event in its entirety will see their 1.5 hours of virtual interactive education credit posted to their My ACHE account within 2 weeks of this event in the My Education Credits section. That concludes our session, which is copyrighted in 2026 by the American College of Healthcare Executives. All rights reserved. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.